Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. My first video of October 2024, kicking off Halloween in the Den this year. And we're beginning with a review of The Mummy, 1932, Universal Pictures. And in fact, I'm going to be reviewing the other 4 Universal Mummy pictures over the rest of this month. So stay tuned. Every Wednesday, we will be plumbing the depths of ancient Egypt. I don't know. I got nothing there. So this was the third Universal monster picture in the sound era. Of course, there was the Phantom of the Opera. It was a silent film. Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy. We see some actors in this who have been in those other films. But what's interesting about this one is that while Dracula and Frankenstein are both, based on a book, The Mummy is an original story. Now, of course, it borrows maybe from a few places, but overall it's original. It sort of creates the concept of the mummy as a horror icon. There are some similarities between this film and Dracula, but I think the differences are what really counts, and we'll talk about that as we go through the movie. So let's get started here, and beware of spoilers because we're going to be talking about the entire film. So, a Universal picture. Karl Laemmle presents Boris Karloff in The Mummy, produced by Karl. I like he gets his name in there twice right off the bat. From the story by Nina Wilcox Putnam and Richard Schayer. Interesting thing about Nina Wilcox Putnam, in my opinion, is that this is not the most terrifying thing she ever worked on. Because she also helped create the very first income tax form. It's all true. But apparently those two had worked on a story. I don't know if it was meant to be a screenplay or just a book about Cagliostro that involves this man who's lived an impossibly long life using, I think they said nitrates, which bodes well for me considering all the bacon I eat. And that helped them craft this story. There's also a book by Arthur Conan Doyle called The Ring of Thoth, or Toth, that bears some resemblance to it. And like I said, there's some resemblance between this film and Dracula. So it has a few influences. Also, of course, the ancient Egypt craze was big at this point after the discovery of King Tut's tomb and the big exhibition of what was found in it. And reincarnation was a big thing at this moment, too. And I'm sure that's where it connects with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was into a lot of that stuff. He was interested in it. That there is Nina Wilcox Putnam. And I think there's one scene in particular later in the film when I was watching it for maybe the second or third time here recently, where I kind of went, oh, I think that scene has a woman's touch. I'm not sure a guy would have done that. I don't know that he would have thought of that. And of course, here we see King Tut, his sarcophagus being examined. Movie is directed by Karl Freund. This was his first American film that he directed. He was a cinematographer on Dracula and on Metropolis. And I think he does a fine job with this film. And some of the cinematography is really, really nice. So let's talk about our cast a little bit. Of course, Boris Karloff playing Imhotep, also playing Ardath Bey. What do you need to say about Boris Karloff? This is film he did right after Frankenstein. He does a hell of a job in it. You know, Frankenstein only required so much of him because the monster, you know, doesn't talk a lot. He gets to do a lot more acting in this film, and he does a really fantastic job. Zita Johann as well, playing Helen Grosvenor, but also Princess Anck-Sinamen. There's a couple scenes she has in here. Really good. A lot of acting with the face and eyes, and really found it impressive. And it was something that I had kind of overlooked earlier, during earlier viewings. Frank Wemple is played by David Manners. He played Jonathan Harker in Dracula. Typically played romantic leading man, which is what he plays here. And he does a fine job at it. But the movie's really not about him. He's kind of a side character when you get right down to it. Arthur Byron as Sir Joseph Wemple, Frank's father. Guy had been acting in theater and then later film since 1889. Kind of incredible. Dr. Miller, played by Edward Van Sloan. Of course, he played Van Helsing in Dracula, and Dr. Waldman in Frankenstein. He would reprise his role as Van Helsing and Dracula's daughter, playing a very, very similar role here to Van Helsing. Ralph Norton is played by Bramwell Fletcher. He's going to be, well, we're going to see him in the first big scene. We'll talk about him in a minute. Noble Johnson playing the Nubian, servant of Sir Joseph, later under the domination of the Mummy. Interesting guy, did a lot of movies, typically didn't get great parts, but he was in King Kong, though. Well, again, not a great part, but he was in a big movie. Started the first film company, it was in Omaha, Nebraska, that made what were at the time called race films, what we would call just nowadays being, you know, black movies, African-American films, however you want to put it. So he was very early in that, trying to create cinema that would basically give better parts to black actors rather than just sort of the porter or, you know, just kind of a side character. The endeavor was not entirely successful, but it started others rolling, and thank goodness for that. Catherine Byron as Frau Miller. I always say Mueller, but it's pronounced Miller in the film. Leonard Moody as Professor Pearson. James Crane is going to play the Pharaoh, and Henry Victor, if you can find him in this film as the Saxon warrior, you're doing better than everybody else. So there's our cast. We start with this. You got to think, again, we don't have mummy movies up until this point. It's a new concept. A lot of the people in the audience are going to be unfamiliar with it. Then you're going to have heard something because of the King Tut exhibitions, but this is very new to them, so it's a smart move. This is the scroll of Thoth. Herein are set down the magic words by which Isis raised Osiris from the dead. O Amun-Ra, O God of gods, death is but the doorway to new life. We live today, we shall live again. In many forms shall we return, O Mighty One. So, setting up the concept of animating the dead, setting up the concept of reincarnation right off the bat, central concepts to this movie. Although maybe not the most important themes when you get down to it. So we open, we see ancient Egyptian ruins. This is the Field Expedition, season 1921, British Museum. And here we have some archaeologists who have been working in Egypt for a while. This is sort of the end of their season. They really only have one find that is impressive. Sitting at the desk is Sir Joseph. Ralph Norton is next to him. Dr. Miller is examining that mummy in the background. And Norton really wants to get into that mummy and this box that they found. That's the interesting stuff. He doesn't really care about, you know, all this pottery and stuff. And Sir Joseph saying, we learn more from these little bits of pottery than we do from a mummy. We're here for the knowledge. We're not here for the fame. And at that point, Miller calls them over and says, hey, you guys need to take a look at this. This is a weird mummy. the eviscera is still in it. He was not mummified in a traditional way. I think this was a live burial. And here we see, for the first time, Boris Karloff in the full mummy makeup. Unbelievable job from Jack Pierce. I think it's right up there, rivals the Frankenstein makeup. It just has this air of reality about it. It's really good. It's rather than being sort of, let's make something outlandish that couldn't exist look real. It's like, let's just make this look as real as possible. And this shows that the mummy that has been found is Imhotep, and around about when he, when he lived. But on the other side, the spells that would protect his soul in his journey through the afterlife have been scratched out and destroyed. And I think that Dr. Miller says something like he was sentenced to death twice. So obviously this is not a good thing when you're being buried under ancient Egyptian rites. And so Norton suggests, maybe he got a little too gay with the Vestal Virgins. And Miller, much more serious than Norton, says, well, they were the daughters of Pharaoh, and they were sacred. He goes, so it is possible something like that happened, and this was punishment. Now, Norton now is just chomping at the bit to get into this box that they found, and Sir Joseph's finally, okay, we're not going to get any cataloging done until I let you look at this thing. We'll just take a quick look. So they unwrap it and take this out of the wooden box and find that the seal on this box is as yet unbroken. So it is a major find. And Norton is just like, obsessed with this thing. So Miller asks Sir Joseph, can we talk outside for a minute? And he says, okay. He's saying, look, based on who we found, etc., that box may contain the Scroll of Thoth. And of course, Sir Joseph is like, well, that would be great. That would be a major find. And he goes, no, we don't want to mess with that. We don't want to mess with that. The line is something like, the ancient spells are weaker, but still have some of their potency. So we see right away that Miller is sort of this bridge between the materialistic worldview. He is obviously an archaeologist, or he's working in archaeology, and the spiritual. Sir Joseph, fundamentally a materialist. I mean, I don't know what his religious beliefs are, but whatever they are, they take a backseat to his belief in science. In other words, sadly, the hubris of science, of thinking at this moment, we know all there is to know. A good scientist should know you clearly don't, because obviously more is going to be discovered. But this is going to be a central theme of this. And let's be honest, it's a central theme of horror. I think a lot of the horror genre kind of comes from the intrusion of a materialistic worldview on a spiritual worldview, and the two kind of not necessarily fighting it out, but people trying to reconcile them or live between them or what have you. You see it in Frankenstein. You can see it somewhat in Dracula as well. So they leave Ralph in there with the box. Not a great idea. And so he opens it up and finds the scroll. And he starts to translate the scroll, writing a few things down. And as he is muttering what is on the scroll, the mummy awakens. And we get this great scene. You see, they focus for a minute on the ring. The ring is important. But we see the scroll there as he's going over it, and then the hand comes down. And Norton kind of loses it. Essentially, Norton becomes a mental case. Sorry, I had to do that. So he kind of screams. You see the mummy, his bandages trailing out the door as he leaves with the scroll. Sir Joseph runs in, and Norton's laughing hysterically, and he says, "Where's the mummy? He went for a little walk." So kind of similar to Renfield when he's down in the hold. Renfield's creepier by far, but it kind of gives you that, okay, something unbelievable has just happened. It's blown this guy's mind. If you play the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, this is what failing a sanity check looks like in very stark terms. And so all that's left is that paper that he did some translation on and this dusty handprint. Fast forward 11 years later, the field expedition, season 1932, British Museum. They have a nicer sign now. It's nice to know they're doing well. And we get our first look at David Manners as Frank Wimple, looking like a romantic leading man. And he sees off in the distance a man on a donkey, with this guy leading him. Doesn't know what that's about. He goes back in and he's talking with his colleague here, and they're going, "Man, this has been a bad season," And Frank's going, "Oh, if we could only do like what my father did," He was, well, that took a lot of work too. But anyways, the point is, it has not been a successful season. They haven't had any really good finds. They're kind of desperate for something here. And so Ardath Bey, now we see Karloff in the makeup he's going to wear. Now, again, not as creepy looking as the mummy makeup itself, but unbelievable. The really fine lines and the wrinkles, and we'll see a couple better close-ups as the film goes on. It's really good. And I wonder, is it what he really looks like, or is this sort of an illusion? Because he does have mystical powers. So he arrives and tells them he can lead them to the tomb of Princess Oxynomen. There's like a medallion that he found, and he knows the spot. And they say, well, that would be great. Obviously, this would be a major find, and they haven't had a good year. He's looking over the medallion. Can you lead us there? And in fact, yeah, I can. It's right over there. So they start digging, get the crew out there, and they eventually do find the tomb. And they discover that the seal is unbroken. So this is a major find, this princess. And there's the news of the day. Tomb of Ancient Princess uncovered intact. And so it's going to go to the Cairo Museum. Apparently, this is the agreement that was made for the expedition. And it's in a gallery. You can see her, the complete this and that and the other, yada, yada, yada. And we find, looking over the artifacts and the mummy, Ardath Bey. And maybe he's a little bit too interested in that mummy. And so he's looking at it, and then we see the mummy case, the sarcophagus. And look at that face, look at those eyes, because we're going to see them in just a moment. In fact, right now. So, Helen Grosvenor is played by, like I said, by Zita Johann. Great job in this movie. So this is our first sighting of her. She's at this party. Lots of guys, dancing and yada, yada, yada. But she's on this balcony. She's looking out at the pyramids. And her host, Dr. Miller, says, "Oh, you're ignoring all these nice young men." And she's, going, "Oh, to only like see, Egypt in its glory and not this, dirty old city." And there's a romantic yearning in her. And we're going to get some conversation that establishes that she's staying here with Miller in Cairo. Her father is in the Sudan. He's like a superintendent or something. And we're going to learn that while her father is British, her mother is Egyptian. And that's going to be important as we go forward. Meanwhile, back in the museum, Ardath Bey meets Sir Joseph. He refuses to shake his hand, ostensibly because, well, it's an Oriental custom. We don't, like to touch hands. Maybe there's another reason that he doesn't want to have that kind of physical contact with Sir Joseph, who is, not really bothered by it. And he invites him back to his office. And so it was basically closing time at the museum. But he says, "Listen, you helped us find this amazing thing. You stay as late as you want. These two are going to be heading home. And Frank is kind of annoyed that they're not taking this back, this exhibit back to London. Sir Joseph is like, hey, that was the agreement that was made. Sir Joseph is very much about the knowledge, the learning, no interest whatsoever in fame and glory. And we see that in this scene as well. So Ardeth Bey pops out this oil lamp and the scroll of Thoth and starts reciting. And we get a good image there of him with the shadowing and all that stuff. They do take time to show off the makeup. And as he does that, Helen at this party elsewhere suddenly kind of stops dancing and falls into this trance and starts walking away, gets her coat, her wrap, gets into this cab, wants to go to the Cairo Museum. And as she pulls up and heads toward the door, the two Wimples there see it and are kind of like, what is she doing here? And she's pounding on the door to be let in. And so, Frank is like, we're closed right now, etc. She collapses onto the ground. So of course they're going to take her home and look after her. So she's kind of unconscious. They're looking after her. And while Helen lays there, she is like whispering, muttering in ancient Egyptian and mentions the name Imhotep, which which Sir Joseph immediately picks up on. And she awakens and, doesn't know where she is, how she got there. They sort of fill her in on it. You can see Frank is already very taken with her. And at that point, Miller arrives. He found out she had left. He found out where she went. He came over here. And Sir Joseph says, okay, there's something we need to talk about. So Miller checks up on her, and we could leave in a moment. And again, Joseph's like, well, she needs to rest for a minute. Come into my office. We need to talk. And so Frank is going to entertain her. And now, like I said, he's immediately smitten with her. They talk a little bit about him helping find the mummy and unburying, taking it out of the tomb. And she's like, how could you do that? It kind of bothers her. And his response is, well, science, I love that. So they're talking, and he's noticing the resemblance between her and the princess in their office, or in the office. Miller, Joseph, he says, she said the name Imhotep. And Miller's like, okay, that's a little bit weird. And he gets this phone call that something's happened at the museum. So he and Miller rush down there. A guard has been killed, and the scroll was left behind. And they take a look at it and realize it's a scroll of Thoth that has been lost for 11 years, along with the mummy. So Frank's getting down to business. I love you, and she's kind of like, well, you just saved me. Of course, maybe. He's like, no, don't make fun of me. I'm serious. I love you. I wonder, we know that a whole chunk of the film that involved different reincarnations that Helen had been through since being the princess, it was taken out. And we know one part had a Saxon warrior in it. That was what I was alluding to earlier. I wonder if there wasn't some connection between Frank and her in an earlier time, because he falls really hard and really fast for her. And she kind of feels it as well, and so I wondered if that wasn't part of it. So he manages to get a kiss out of it. I'm sure this was slightly shocking in the early 30s. And those two arrive, and Sir Joseph's starting to figure out what's going on. And he says something to the effect of, she is under the curse And through her, the curse is now going to, be on my son. So he's kind of shook by the whole thing. So the men retire to the study, and what you're witnessing here partly is Sir Joseph. His entire worldview is being shattered. Miller asks him something to the effect of, "Do you still think the mummy was stolen?" He just kind of mutters, "I don't know." So the rug's been pulled out from under him. He's kind of a broken man at this point. Frank thinks it's a bunch of nonsense. This is foolish. But they have the scroll, and Miller says, "I think you need to burn the scroll. We need to destroy it." At that point, there's a knock, a ring on the door. The Nubian, as he is called, answers, and it is Ardeth Bey. And Ardeth Bey starts using his powers on the Nubian to dominate him. And this is at one point kind of, the idea is partly, the Nubian is of the ancient Egyptian blood. And this is maybe partly why he can dominate him and have some influence over Helen, who's half Egyptian, but not so much on the men. Clearly there's something in the blood that increases his power, his potency over them. So it gives him that look. You're going to see the pinprick lights in the eyes, and the Nubian bows to him. So he has just taken control of this man, who's now going to let him into Sir Joseph's house. And while the men are still in the office, he enters, spies Helen on this couch. Does not immediately know who she is. And I love the way that Karloff moves as the mummy. Slowly, deliberately. As though he can't move any faster than that. And you get that idea. Yeah, this is an animated corpse. This is not really a living person. And he looks down at her, and she awakens to see him, a little bit of a shock. And he starts using his sort of hypnotic powers on her. She kind of rises almost in a trance. Now, this whole sequence is really pivotal in the film, and it's something that, to me, it really elevates the film. And especially because of Zita Johann's performance here. Karloff as well, though. She is sort of in this trance, but it's not a sort of blank-eyed, just staring kind of trance. It's, there's a lot of activity on her face and in her eyes. Fighting it, but not fighting it, confusion, fear, etc. There's a lot going on, and really watch her, even while other things are going on around her. Watch that connection between these two and how it's maintained. It's really, really good. And so, she's kind of like, can't really move. And again, they're talking, we need to burn this thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they notice somebody's in the room with Helen. And they enter and find Ardeth Bey. And Wimple's kind of like, what is he doing here? He invited him, but you didn't expect him so soon. And why wasn't he announced, et cetera? It's a little perplexing. And you see those two in the center, though, of the screen kind of dominating things while the others talk. And Miller, of course, is pretty sure he knows what's going on. He's also pretty sure he doesn't know what to do about it. And so while they're talking, Helen keeps focused on Ardeth Bey, and you get this nice little duel between Miller and Imhotep here. Again, there's Helen just, while they're talking, and he's asking questions and Imhotep's kind of parrying those questions. He's still sort of hiding who he is, what he is. And Miller's kind of like, well, now, come on, let's stop the pretense. I know exactly who you are. He shows him that paper from 11 years ago with the symbols on it. And, Ardeth Bey is like, well, I don't speak, I don't know that ancient dialect. He's still kind of pretending. And then he shows him the picture they took of the mummy that was stolen. And, he's kind of like, well, why are you showing me this? I don't really care. And Miller at that point is kind of like, well, we know who you are and we know what you've come for, and Ardeth Bay wants that scroll, and he believes that it's there. And they tell him, no, it's back at the museum in my office, but you see him brandishing the ring and, you need to retrieve it for me immediately. He kind of throws the pretense off as well. And he has this wonderful arrogance because he is clearly more powerful than these men. And there's really nothing they can do to stop him. There's this moment between he and Miller where Miller says, if I could get my hands on you, I would tear your, dried, desiccated body to pieces, but he can't get his hands on him. And that's kind of the point. But he says, look, if you make any move against us, we'll destroy the scroll. And that gets him, that kind of checkmates him. He tries to use his powers on Miller, not successfully, but so he can hold them off, but he can't really control them. And so again, he leaves finally. Miller is like, you've got to destroy the scroll. And you can see where Sir Joseph is he's destroyed. You find out something that you believed in your whole life is not right. It's a huge blow. Whether it's somebody betraying you or a fact that you really relied on, it's horrific. And this man is losing his religion here, his religion being science. So it's really interesting. And Miller's kind of like, yeah, but we got to burn the scroll. Okay, promise me you'll burn the scroll. Yeah, I'll burn the scroll. So we next see Ardeth Bay in his hideout, wherever it might be in Cairo, and he has this scrying pool that he's using. That'll be even more important later. And he could see that, in fact, Sir Joseph did have the scroll in his house, and he gets it out, and he's going to burn it. And so Imhotep kind of, through the scrying pool, uses his powers and basically gives Sir Joseph a heart attack. And he collapses. But you also see Imhotep sort of collapse at the end. Remember what Miller said earlier. The spells of Egypt, they still have some potency, but they're not as powerful as they once were. So we have a very powerful antagonist here, but not so powerful that he can just completely dominate. And so the Nubian comes in, gathers up the scroll, burns some other papers. And when Frank and Miller are later there and they find Sir Joseph dead, he finds the burned papers and he goes, well, good. He's already destroyed the scroll. That's important. Trust but verify, though, he takes a few pieces of the paper with him. He says, we need to get to Helen. And he has this Isis medallion. And he tells Frank, put this on, wear it, keep it on. Now, when a wise man tells you to do something in a horror movie, what's the first thing you probably need to do? Argue with them, and as soon as possible, do the opposite. Very important in horror films. So he says, okay, let's go see Helen. Because he kind of now, Imhotep's figured out who she is, etc. We now see Helen in her apartment, and she gets this call from Frank, and he's like, hey, stay where you're at. We're going to be right over. Yeah, I don't have any place to go. I'll be here. And they're rushing over, and that's when Dr. Miller notices that's not the scroll that was burned. It was something else. He says, Imhotep has the scroll. This is bad. And we're going to have to do something about it. And I don't know what. So Imhotep, back at his place, has the hoodoo going, and from a distance puts Helen back into a trance. And she gets up, gets dressed, gets her dog, and rushes down to where he is. She's in a trance. She's not completely entranced here, but primarily in a trance. And he leads her into the room with the scrying pool. And you notice in the background, there is that statue of the cat goddess Bast. There is a cat in the room with them that's going to do something horrible in just a little bit. But so he sits her down, and he's now going to show her past life and his past life. And, she's kind of dopey, doesn't necessarily believe it, but he's like, look into the pool. We get this nice mist as it clears. Now, here's something I love. This is a little bit of technical brilliance, in my opinion. The flashback to ancient Egypt looks like a silent movie. The way it's shot, the way the makeup is done, and it is in fact silent. And I thought, what a clever way to show the past. In 1932, right, silent movies are part of the past. They're not that far past, though. So people in the audience have almost certainly seen silent movies. I just thought it was a really clever way to do it. So what we see is Imhotep and Princess Oxynamen. She's on her deathbed. She's sick. He's trying to take care of her, but he ultimately fails and she dies. And so there's a big royal procession and a big royal funeral. They carry her into the tomb where she'll be found 3,000 years later. But Imhotep isn't done yet. He's fallen in love with her. Now she's a Vestal Virgin. He's a high priest. Not supposed to happen. He doesn't care. He steals the scroll of Thoth and starts to perform the magic to bring her back to life. But he's caught. And he is sentenced to a horrible death. They basically wrap him up in the bandages alive and scratch out those magic spells and seal him in his coffin. And they're going to bury him that way. Now think about this. And I think this is an important distinction for me between this film and Dracula. Dracula's never really shown as anything other than an inhuman monster. And Dracula's interest in Mina is predatory. Imhotep, on the other hand, is a living, breathing man. And while he has made some very poor choices, he has not loved wisely. He has loved. He's doing this out of love for this woman. Now, it may not be something she would want him to do, but that is the motivation. And I think there's a little more human connection, I think, between the audience and this guy, this understanding of love, of passion, of doing stupid things, more so than Dracula. Dracula's really just a monster when you get down to it. So they steal him in. You notice that looks like Boris Karloff. I wonder if that prop still exists somewhere. It's a really good likeness of him, just like the one is a really good likeness of Zeta Jan. They take the coffin out into the wilderness, bury him. The guards are killed. The workers are all killed. So none will know where he and that scroll of Thoth are buried, are interred. And so seeing this, now Helen, again, she doesn't completely react to it because she's somewhat in a trance. She's under his power. And this is another really good scene between the two of them. She's sort of repelled. She's sort of attracted. There's like a war going on in her soul between Helen Grosvenor and Princess Oxynamen. And I think she does a fantastic job of showing that conflict within her. She returns back to her apartment. Frank is like, where did you go? You were supposed to stay here. I can do anything I want. You can't tell me what to do. And he starts questioning her, where is your dog? Where is the dog? Well, at one point in that earlier scene, the cat leaves. And then we hear this horrible screech from the dog, the cat apparently having killed it. So the cat maybe is sort of magical as well. So, but if you didn't want Imhotep to go down before, if you're an animal lover, you want him to go down now. So anyway, she argues with him a bit, but can't answer the questions. And she starts realizing, oh my gosh, he took control of me again. She starts to realize how vulnerable she is. And Frank's like, I love you. I will never leave you. We will protect you. We're going to take you back to our house, or my house now, I guess his father being gone, and we're going to look after you, which is what they do. And that's Dr. Miller's wife, looking after her. They have a nurse. This is a nice scene. It took me a few viewings to sort of pick up a little bit on what was partly going on here. Helen's becoming more aware of what's going on inside of her. And she asked the nurse, at first she's asking her, like, well, could you kind of help me get out of here? She still has that attraction to Imhotep. It's like an addiction. No, we can't do that. The men are discussing with the doctor what's wrong with her. He's like, I honestly can't tell you what's wrong with her. So Miller's really trying to impress on Frank here. This is a mystical thing. This isn't science. You need to stop worrying about that. Helen now asks Mrs. Miller, could I have my makeup, my toiletries, maybe, put on a dressing gown, etc. And at first I thought, oh, this is just like her. She's trying to be clever. She's trying to get away from them. And then it hit me. No, this is Helen trying to assert control over herself, over this princess. She doesn't want to lay there in bed completely passive. She's trying to be active. In this case, it's putting on makeup and all this kind of stuff, but it's like something familiar and something that's an expression of her as opposed to the princess. And so there's more lovey-dovey talk with Frank, and with, and Miller calls it out. He says, this is good. You're fighting. You're going to have to fight these urges in you. There's a battle going on, and she's very concerned. I mean, we're often nowadays used to this kind of thing, and you just kind of go, yeah, it's a little melodramatic. You got to really get into what these characters are going through. Like I said, it's kind of like an addiction with her. She's not under control. She's not controlling herself, and it's very frightening. And the fact that this man has this power over you, and you don't really know who he is. I mean, she does now, but doesn't at the same time. It's very startling. So the doctor says, look, Frank, you're going to have to look after her. I'll come and relieve you at a certain point, but we've got to stay alert. He's going to try to get her again, and she's going to go to him. Absolutely. He has the power. And so Miller, Frank says, yes, that's fine. He decides now to make the bonehead move, which is he puts the Isis amulet on the doorknob. Okay, he's trying to protect Helen, but he's now left himself vulnerable, and he kind of lays down to go to sleep on the couch and doze a little bit. And Imhotep is waiting. Hey, mummies never sleep. And he starts at least to do to Frank what he did to his father. And he starts to sort of choke, etc. And Frank starts crawling to the door. He realizes, the amulet, I was a fool. And he's reaching forward, to like crush his heart. And Frank just makes it to the doorknob and gets the amulet in his hand. But he's out. He's down for the count. And Helen now emerges, steps over him. So Imhotep has now gotten the second thing that he wanted. He's got the scroll. Now he's got his princess. We go down to the museum. We find a guard, again murdered. Real bad time to be a guard at the Cairo Museum. And Helen's Ankhsenamen persona is now at the fore. She's now Ankhsenamen. She's in the garb, etc. And Imhotep is explaining to her what has happened to her, which she finds rather confusing, as one would. And he shows her this mummy. This is you. This is your body. But what we're going to do is this. We're going to get rid of that body. We're going to put you through the ritual, and I can raise you as I was raised, and we can be together forever in this sort of undead state. And there's again the mummy, and so she's kind of like horrified by this. This isn't jiving with her completely. Imhotep, though, remember, this is a man who has gone to hell for this woman. He's trying to bring her back. He's in love, It's not a wholesome love, but it's a love just the same. He is not going to be deterred. And so he takes the mummy, puts it in this chimney, essentially, lights it on fire, and says, now, I've gone through like 3,000 years of pain. I only ask of you a moment of pain. And we see the Nubian working on the embalming kind of fluid stuff. And at this point, Oxynomon is like, you're not going to put me in that. No. I mean, and Helena starts to, if not assert herself, become apparent to her. She's going, well, first it's, I am a priestess of Isis. It is forbidden for me to be around dead things and all this stuff. And he's kind of like, yeah. Let's not worry about that. So he says, the time has come for the final prayer. He's ignoring her pleas entirely. And at a certain point, he touches her arm and leaves that dust. And so he sends the Nubian to get this ritual dagger and to, seize the princess. And he does. And she's begging with him. She's pleading with him. I have the lines here, which I wanted to read because I really liked them. And no, I didn't memorize them. She's yelling, no, I'm alive. I'm young. I won't die. I loved you once, but now you belong with the dead. I am Oxynomon, but I'm somebody else too. I want to live, even in this strange new world. And then the response from Imhotep, which is, I think this is what makes this a more interesting film than Dracula, because there's some genuine human emotions beyond mere predation in them. For thy sake, I was buried alive. I ask of thee only a moment of agony. Only so can we be reunited. You shall not plunge my body into that. Let the deed be done. And so when he grabs her arm there, let me go, don't kill me. I'm a priestess of Isis. Save me from that mummy. It's dead. Save me. Really powerful. Great lines and really well delivered by Zita. She did a great job. So he deploys the magic ring, and the Nubian, who I think was starting to be like, he is a mummy. Holy crap. He backs away. He's cowed, and it brings her back under Imhotep's control. And he leads her over to this sort of, well, it's not really a sacrificial altar, but it might as well be. And she says, I will not resist you now. I will do as you wish of me. Miller now finds Frank collapsed on the floor. He's thankfully still alive. He says, we've got to get to Helen. We've got to get to the museum. So we have Ardith Bey, Imhotep, going through the ritual, preparing to do the deed, approaching her with the dagger. These two arrive. They start stumbling through the museum trying to find him. He's got the dagger poised right at her stomach when he sees Frick and Frack show up. And this gives her a moment. And she rises up. The spell is broken. His concentration has been broken. And she starts praying to Isis. And again, I want to read the line because I really enjoyed it. O Isis, holy maiden, I was your consecrated vestal. I broke my vows. Save me now. Teach me the ancient summons, the holy spell that I've forgotten. I call upon these of old. So she's making this last plea to Isis to save her from this terrible, terrible fate. So he approaches the two men, and they kind of realize there's not a lot they can do here. What are they going to do about this? And this is another interesting part of this, because it's not the two guys rush in and are the heroes and slay the monster. He uses the ring again, and it cows the two of them. And I loved that particular shot. And you see them, go away. While they're doing that, Oxynomon, Helen, starts chanting the ancient prayer. Isis has come through, and he comes behind her with the dagger. Before he can do anything with it, You see the arm of the statue move outward, holding the Ankh. And there's, it cows him back, and then the scroll of Thoth starts burning. And as it burns, the magic burns with it. And you can see he starts to change and once again returned to his decayed form. And Frank comforts Helen, who is now back to her normal mind. And the last we see of Imhotep are the bones. So, the end, it's a universal picture. The first couple times I ever saw The Mummy, it was fine. It didn't do a lot for me. Repeated viewings, though, I've started to really pick up on more of the deeper themes and ideas in the film of Helen struggling against not just Imhotep, but also this past life of hers, to be free to live her life as she wants to live it. Imhotep, a more sympathetic villain, I think. A villain still, but you kind of understand where he's coming from and what he went through. Think about the torture. I mean, not just the torture of being buried alive, but then to be in this sort of limbo, the underworld, unprotected, unable to be reborn. And then finally born again in this desiccated husk of a body. Really horrific what he went through due to his love for this woman. And she did return the love at the time. So a sympathetic villain. I love Dr. Miller, his bravado, his bluffing, but also his acknowledgement of like, this dude's got us, I don't know what I'm going to do. And in fact, what he and Frank managed to do at the end is really just distract Imhotep so that Helen, Ankhsenamen, can save herself with the help of Isis. Very interesting film. It's a good movie. I think it really deserves to be up there with Dracula and Frankenstein as a real classic from Universal, especially because they weren't working from a book with an existing framework. They kind of had to invent the mummy genre themselves, and I think they did a really nice job doing it. So, what say you out there in YouTube Rumble land? What do you think of this film? Is it a favorite? Is it one you don't really like? What do you think of some of those themes I was bringing up? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Next week, I'm going to be reviewing The Mummy's Hand, the reboot, sort of this film, and the movie that launches the other 3 films in Universal's Mummy series. So we'll be talking about that next week, next Wednesday. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, hitting the like button, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. I really appreciate that. I have a lot of other Halloween-y sort of videos on my channel. You're going to find that in the lower corner down here as this video ends, if you want to check out some of the stuff that I did in previous, I say previous years, really previous year. Last year was when I started my channel, and there's going to be more spooky content to come this year. So until then, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun. Watch The Mummy, and I will hopefully see you soon in Dad's Den of Pop